Good evening, everybody. Well, thank you to the three people at the front who responded to that. Good evening, everybody. That's wonderful. I knew you were here. That's fantastic. Could we just do a little bit of family business before we kick off? There are two couples who have recently got engaged, and I don't think we've celebrated that here at the 7 p.m. So I'm going to embarrass a couple of people. So Curtis and Tanya, where are you? Do you want to stand up, guys? Come on, stand up. Just stand up. Could we just congratulate these guys on their engagement? Whoa. Steady on, Curtis, steady on. Well done, guys. Thanks so much. And also Katie and John. Where's Katie and John? Where are they? There's Katie and John. They're not sitting beside each other, so don't interpret that. So guys, congratulations. Do you want to stand so we can congratulate you? Just good to do that. If you've got your Bibles, which you should have, because there's a Bible in the chair in front of you, and it'll appear here on the screen as well, or maybe you've got your own Bible or your phone. We're going to read from Luke 19, and this is the story of Zacchaeus, and I'm going to read from verse 1 through to verse 10. And this is speaking of Jesus. He entered Jericho and was passing through. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to that place, he looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried and came down and received Jesus joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. He's gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. It's just beautiful. What a beautiful, beautiful passage. More of Zacchaeus in a moment. From 1997 to 2002, Yvonne and I lived in Dunmurry. We were working up in West Belfast in Suffolk Estate. Anybody ever heard of Suffolk Estate? Anybody ever been to Suffolk Estate? There's one or two. Great. Centre of the universe. And we were working up there in a church called St. John the Baptist. And St. John the Baptist sits on the Andersonstown Road, and it's right beside Woodburn Police Station. Those 5 years that we were there were quite special. Both of our kids were born during that time. And Suffolk Estate was a brilliant place to work. It was also a very challenging place to work, but there's some great stories that I'll share at some other time of the Lord at work in Suffolk Estate in West Belfast. But while we were there, our garage was broken into one night, and my golf clubs and all of my fishing gear was nicked. It was the first time anything like that has ever happened to us. The police came round, they dusted down the garage, they were looking for fingerprints, they took our fingerprints, and then told us that realistically speaking, it was highly unlikely that we were going to ever get anything back. To be honest with you, I didn't really care that much about the golf clubs. They were like 30 years old, they were passed down to me, and they weren't that good, so I wasn't crying over those. But I lost every single bit of fishing equipment that I had. And that was hard, I have to say. I was not a happy bunny. But the insurance kicked in and everything was replaced. But I have to be honest with you, it wasn't a great experience having things stolen. It wasn't a great experience having your garage broken into. And I remember for a number of months afterwards feeling a little less secure. The fact that your house had been broken into, the fact that some of your things had been stolen, left me feeling vulnerable, a little insecure, a little uncertain. You were much more conscious about making sure that everything was locked and all the windows were locked and so on and so forth. We're in this series walking through the Ten Commandments, and we're on the eighth commandment. The eighth commandment, it has 3 words: do not steal. And that's what we're going to be thinking about this evening. And we've called this series Formation Rules because the Ten Commandments don't just set a standard. They are a picture, they're a description of what it looks like to be formed and shaped by our Heavenly Father. The Ten Commandments are saying to us, this is how we're to think, this is how we're to feel, this is how we're to live as followers of Jesus. And we're thinking about these 3 words tonight: do not steal. There are going to be 2 or 3 things I think the Bible as a whole from 30,000 feet wants to teach us about the 8th commandment. I think it's going to teach us that your property, your personal possessions matter to God. I think that's the first thing it's going to teach us. I think the second thing that the Bible wants to explain is why personal property, private property and personal possessions matter to God. And then thirdly, when we come into land, I want us to think about what do we do if we find ourselves tempted to steal? More of that in a wee minute. So here's the first thought: your private property, your personal possessions matter to God. If I was to ask you the question, what does the Bible say to us about private property and personal possessions? And we were to get the roving mic out and we were to walk around church tonight and say, okay, so what does the Bible tell? Tell us something that the Bible teaches us about personal possessions and private property. What would you say? How would you answer that? I'm sure as we went around church this evening, we would probably hear things like this. The Bible teaches me that my possessions are not to possess me. Possessions are not to possess us. We might hear people say things like private property and personal possessions are gifts of God to be shared. Maybe somebody would talk about giving things away and being generous with what we have. Maybe somebody would talk in terms of holding on lightly to our private property and our personal possessions. Or maybe somebody would say that we've got to be really, really careful that we don't make material things the place of our ultimate trust. So if we were saying all of that, we would probably be getting really, really close to what the Bible says about private property and personal possessions. And all of that would be right, and all of that would be good. And if all of us were living like that, that would be absolutely amazing. But the 8th commandment looks at the flip side of that. The flip side of the coin is that our private property and our personal possessions matter to God. That respecting other people's property and respecting other people's possessions matters to God. And that is part and parcel of what it means to follow Jesus. So the 8th commandment tells us, do not steal. Do not steal. Respect other people's possessions and property. Do not steal. It's a 3-word commandment. I mean, it's so punchy. It's a soundbite. It's stark. Do not steal. But if you delve into the Old Testament, you see the Old Testament, particularly the prophets and the minor prophets, sort of digging into what this 8th commandment actually means. What does it mean to not steal? And as you read through the minor prophets and the major prophets, you will see that actually this 8th commandment plays a significant part on what the prophets are saying to the children of Israel and how they're to live before God. So here's Ezekiel 18. Ezekiel 18 is given over to the 8th commandment. And Ezekiel gives a number of examples of what not stealing looks like. Here's the first one: taking financial advantage of someone. So here in this area, there's a history of money lending and illegal money lending. And that often comes with oppressive interest rates. So you know Christmas is coming down the line. You want to buy presents for your kids. So you go to a particular guy. You know where he is. You know who he is. And you get £500 in order to buy presents for your kids. But the interest rates are crippling. So when it comes to the new year, you're in trouble. And Ezekiel 18 tells us that is stealing. Exorbitant, extortionate interest rates, whether legal or illegal, is a form of stealing. Robbery, that's another one that Ezekiel 18 talks about. Violent robbery. When somebody forces you to give up your personal property, your personal possessions, your private property. In my last church, we had an organist called Deirdre. Deirdre was from Dublin, and Deirdre would play at our 10 o'clock service, our early service, our 9 o'clock service. And one day, Deirdre was walking to church, and she had come into the car park, and she was opening up the door to get into church. And Deirdre was assaulted. And her handbag and her purse, everything that she had on her that day was stolen. And you know what? It took months for Deirdre to come back because it happened at church. And Ezekiel, without any hesitation, says that is evil. That is evil. Another example that Ezekiel gives is withholding help from someone who is injured. So if I see that you are in help, in need, in any shape or form, and I sort of think, oh, get on with it, Ezekiel says that's a form of theft. Turn to Malachi 3. We have Malachi speaking to people going into the temple who are withholding their tithe. And what Malachi is saying is not only can you steal from one another, but you can actually steal from God. That which is rightfully God's, which is withheld, Malachi is saying that is a form of theft. When I withhold what is rightly God's, I steal from him. It's fascinating. Fast forward to Mark, and Jesus is speaking about the Pharisees, and it's almost like the flip side of the coin, where Jesus criticizes the religious leaders of the day, putting unnecessary pressure on widows to give more than they can afford into the temple. So both sides of those coin are a form of theft. Whether it's withholding from God or putting pressure, undue pressure on people to give to God. And then in Amos 8, just one last example, he talks about merchants, shopkeepers rigging their scales. So, private property and personal possessions matter to God, and they're to matter to us. But why? Why do these things matter to God? Here are a number of, I hope, just short, punchy points. Personal possessions and private property matter to God because we matter to God. We have a South African, Yvonne and I have a South African friend whose father and stepmother were broken into last year, just outside Cape Town. And it was an appalling experience that they had. As a result of that, now when they go to bed, they not only lock the front door, not only do they lock the back door, not only do they lock every window in the house, but when they get into their bedroom, they lock themselves into the bedroom. So that if somebody gets into the house, they're not going to be able to get into the bedroom. Does anybody want to live like that? I don't want to live in a world like that. Do you remember, this is Jesus speaking. He says this, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Do you know what comes next? Do you remember what comes next? A wee phrase. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. The second is like it. In other words, these two commandments have equal value, equal importance. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Why does it matter? Because we matter. We matter to God. And if I matter to God and you matter to God, if I'm made in God's image and you're made in God's image, then I have a responsibility to respect not only you as a physical person, but your possessions and your property. It matters because everyone belongs to God. It matters because everything belongs to God. A gentleman in our last church, his name was Derek, and Derek, by the time that we had arrived in our last church, had just retired, and Derek decided to treat himself. And so Derek decided he was going to buy himself a Jag. He really wanted to treat himself. He wanted to buy himself a Jag, and he came and had a conversation with me, because what he wanted to know was, do you think it would be okay with the Lord if he bought himself a Jag? And so we had a wee conversation about that. But there was Derek. Derek understood that everything that he had was a gift from God. Everything that he had, his retirement package, everything that he had was a gift from God. And he wanted to make sure that buying a Jag was going to honor God. And I said to him, as long as I could drive it, that would be okay. See, everything that we have is gift. Everything that we have is gift. Everything that you have, everything that you have, everything that you have is a gift from God. Your private property, your personal possessions is a gift from God. And if I take that from you, I'm not just stealing from you. Who else am I stealing from? God. See, that's why private property and personal possessions matter to God, because when I steal it from you, I'm not just stealing it from you, I'm stealing it from God. It matters because everyone matters to God. It matters because everything matters to God. And it matters because when we steal, it also matters because when I steal something, when I take something which is not mine without permission, I am not trusting God to provide for me. When I take something which is not mine to take, I am saying to God, God, you are not enough for me. I'm saying to God, God, I don't trust you to provide for me. And it matters finally because when I steal, I'm actually going against God's grain for this world. See, God has designed this world in such a way that we flourish by doing three things. We flourish by working, we flourish by saving, and we flourish by praying. That's how God's designed this world. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I'm glad Room is training for the minister, and he knows this. Sort of expected everybody else to know that one as well, by the way. Give us this day our daily bread. See, we're praying for God's provision. So we work, we save, we pray. See, that's how God's designed his world. That's the grain of the world. To steal is going against God's grain. See, it matters. And these are the reasons why it matters. Private property and personal possessions matter. And it matters because everyone belongs to God. Everything belongs to God. We are called to trust God with the provision of our lives. We are called to work and to save and to pray. But I want to sort of now begin to come into land. That's the sort of, if you like, the sort of biblical framework behind the eighth commandment. But I want to personalize this now and make it personal for all of us. Because the reason why the eighth commandment is there, do not steal, the reason why that's there is because in this room tonight, there will be people who will find that temptation very powerful. There are going to be some of us here this evening who find that temptation really, really powerful. The temptation to steal. And so it's important that we do spend a little bit of time personalizing it as we come in to land, because there will be some of us tonight who really, really wrestle with this temptation. And there's some of us here this evening who will already, either in the past, have been involved with this in some shape or form, or actually actively right now involved with this. And so it's important that we personalize this. I've been ordained for over 30 years now, and in that time I have encountered a number of people for whom the eighth commandment is a real issue. And I found myself this week thinking about one particular person that I encountered in the past. And the thing is, nobody will know them here, by the way, just saying. So don't be sitting there thinking, I wonder who that is. You'll not know who that is. And this individual really was vulnerable to this temptation. It was a stronghold in their lives. It was something that had become a habit. It almost had become like an addiction, a dependency. And when we unpacked that together, he talked about wanting something immediately. That the very thought of waiting for something, the very thought of working for something or saving for something was almost too much for him to cope with. And so he took what he wanted. When we unpacked it a little bit, he admitted that he was convinced that he had to have that particular thing because he felt incomplete without it. For him, he needed to have it to feel contented. There are other people that I've met down over the last number of years who are involved in theft. And for them, that comes from a deep-seated conviction that they have the right to what everybody else has. They may not have worked for it. They may not have earned it. They may not have saved for it. But it's their right to have it. And that can be a profound motivation. And I have met with people and spent time with people who have point blank refused to work and resisted work. And in some cases, that was just sheer laziness. In some cases, it was because they stole because they wanted a shortcut to getting rich fast. In some cases, it was just simply rebellion against the system. And in some cases, it was the thrill. The thrill of walking into a shop and being able to walk out with something without paying for it. It was like bungee jumping. It was like jumping out of a plane with a parachute. It just was such a thrill for them. And so this is deeply personal. This is very, very, very personal. And I want to end with a word of hope tonight for those of us who struggle with this, because did you know that actually in the gospel accounts of Jesus encountered 3 thieves. And in those three occasions, their lives were transformed. Can anybody guess who they are? The first is Matthew, otherwise known as Levi, tax collector. How did Jesus respond to Matthew? What did he do for him? Anybody? Reuben? What did Jesus call Matthew to do? Come follow me. That's a beautiful thing, isn't it? And maybe you're here tonight and you're wrestling with this temptation. What does Jesus do with people who wrestle with this temptation? Answer, he invites them to follow him. The second person I'm thinking of was right at the very, very end of Jesus' life. Anybody guess who that was? The thief on the cross? Yeah. So Jesus is minutes from death, and there beside him, historically described as the thief on the cross. And what does Jesus do for him? He says to him, today you'll be with me in paradise. Jesus looks at that thief on the cross, and that thief, knowing that he was going to a lost eternity, turns to Jesus, knowing that he is guilty of that which has taken him to the cross, knowing that he was guilty of that crime, turns to Jesus in desperation and says, "Remember me." And you know what? That was enough. That was all that Jesus needed. And Jesus said, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." That's beautiful. You know, for sinners like me, that is such good news. Such good news. Such good news. And if you wrestle with this temptation, that's such good news for you. But of course, the third person is Zacchaeus, isn't it? Zacchaeus, the crooked tax collector, who we're told in Luke 19 was rich. He was rich through fiddling people, and yet for some reason that wealth just was not enough. And he's looking for something, and he realizes actually what he's looking for is not another cut from somebody's tax. What he's looking for is Jesus. That is what he's hungering for more than anything else. But the fascinating thing is, not only is he looking for Jesus, but Jesus is looking for him. And Zacchaeus is up a tree, and Jesus is walking through Jericho. And the impression that Luke gives us is that Jesus is actually just heading straight through Jericho. He's on his way to Jerusalem. He's got no plans to stop. But then he sees Zacchaeus up in a tree, and he knows his name already. And Jesus invites himself to Zacchaeus' house. And this really causes a stir, because Jesus is going to the house of a crooked tax collector. How many people in that crowd had been fiddled by Zacchaeus, and yet Jesus is going to the house of Zacchaeus? God's grace is amazing. And we have no idea what goes on in that house. We have no idea of the conversation that he has with Zacchaeus. But what we know is at the end of that conversation, Zacchaeus turns to Jesus and he says, "I am going to liquidate everything that I have, and half of that's going to the poor. And on top of that, I am going to give back 4 times as much as I've taken." Now, what about that? What about that? We were singing earlier on, the very first song that we were singing, "Jesus, you have won me." And Jesus had won Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus had realized that his true contentment was going to be found in Jesus and not in stealing from others. And Jesus had looked at Zacchaeus, and he had seen beyond the sinful, crooked man, and he had seen a man that needed to be saved. And Jesus saves Zacchaeus, and he declares this is a beautiful thing. Today, salvation has come to this man's house. I have no idea where you are with the eighth commandment. You may be here today, and you're, because of the very fact that we're talking about this, you are feeling shame. You do not have to stay in that shame tonight. Jesus is here to meet you, to forgive you, and to cleanse you, and to invite you into a new way of living. You can deal with your shame in a number of ways. You can deflect it. In other words, you can pretend that it's not there. You can distract yourself from it. And you can distract yourself in many, many ways, or you can drown it. And how many of us have drowned our shame, literally, whether that's using alcohol or drugs or just anything that just causes that shame to be dull in some shape or form. But the only way to deal with shame is allowed to be dissolved by the blood of Jesus. And that's good news. That's great news. I think there's two ways that we can respond this evening. I tell you what, can we have the band up? Could you guys come on up? I think there are 2 ways that we can respond this evening. For those of us who are here this evening, who for you this is a stronghold, I would want to say to you that tonight is an opportunity to allow Jesus to break that stronghold and to release you from it. For those of us, secondly, who are here this evening, and the way you feel the temptation of the eighth commandment is that actually you're not convinced that God can provide for you. And so you're pursuing material things to make you feel secure and content. And I think there's an invitation for that group of us to come this evening honestly and say, Father, I'm just going to be honest with you this evening. I don't believe that you can provide for me. Would you do a work in my heart? Would you do a work in my heart, please? So I would love to pray those two things for us, if I may. Can we stand? And so earlier on we were talking about this picture of the Holy Spirit hovering over us. And at creation, the Holy Spirit hovers over chaos, according to Genesis 1. And by the end of Genesis 1, there's something beautiful, something that has been formed and purposed, given meaning. So I'm going to invite you just to take a moment and respond in the quietness of your own heart to what the scriptures have been saying to us this evening out of the eighth commandment. And it might be about contentment. It might be about an unhealthy trust in material things. It might be the fact that you find yourself captive to this temptation. So take a moment, just in silence, and would you invite you, please, to respond to the Lord in your own way, silently in your heart and mind.